yes. You don't have a quick report though, I read it, it's long and detailed, and I've had a lot of questions.
I'm here to answer.
That's kind of a joke. Great. Ready? Yeah. All right. Let's see, I will call to order the City of Salem's Planning Commission for May 20th, 2025. Jennifer, can you please call the roll for us?
Commissioner Pop? Here. Commissioner Fraga?
Here.
Commissioner Heller is absent. Commissioner Warnicki is absent. Commissioner Rhodes? Here. Commissioner Slater?
Here.
Commissioner Tough? Here. Commissioner Truitt is absent. And Commissioner Vera Rendell is absent.
We have quorum. Is Commissioner Truitt absent or has he officially resigned his position now?
This meeting was supposed to be his last one. But he's packing and trying to move, so he's officially resigned.
Okay, so for quorum, then we would need 4. With his resignation, is that correct? We've got 5. Is that correct?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. That's great. All right, before we move on, is there anything here is for a public comment? No, not today. All right. Then I understand that we don't have the ability to vote on the minutes this meeting, but we'll do that next meeting. So we will go right into the public hearing. You are up, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Michael. What would we do without books like that? Speaking of which, I've been in local government for a long time. And thank you as volunteers for being here, because a lot of people don't realize that this is kind of what makes local government work. My name is Michael Brown. I'm the city's manager of housing production programs and incentives. And we're here tonight because at some point in time, someone in the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development wrote 24 CFR 91.105.E.1.II. And if you happen to look that up, it says that before we release the consolidated plan for public comment, we have to hold a public hearing. And so that's what we're here for tonight. And I will explain a few things, and you don't have to take any actions tonight whatsoever. Just listen, absorb, and we have to be comforted. So what does the consolidated plan do? It's kind of a fancy name for a strategic plan or a 5-year plan. You consider strategic 5 years in the future. And it is designed, it's a requirement that we have to do, the city has to do, because we receive as an entitlement community development block grant funds and home investment partnership funds. So those are 2 programs within HUD. We get them as participating jurisdictions, means we get a direct allocation from HUD for this money. And as a result of that, we have to produce a consolidated plan or a 5-year plan. So what we'll do tonight is kind of take a look at what that consolidated plan, how the design of it is, and some of the data elements. We're going to look at the historical grants that we've issued. We'll look a little bit about what community needs are, but not focus too much on that, because that's one of the purposes of tonight, is if you all have input for us on what you think the community's needs are. You have tonight, you also have a whole public comment period. We'll look at the first draft of the proposed goals, and we'll look at the alignment with the housing production strategy. So as I just got to saying, I'll just repeat myself here for the sake of it. Consolidated plan is a 5-year strategic plan. We have to gather information, needs from a wide cross-section of the community. We've been doing that. We've done it. We've taken data from the Our Salem work that was done a couple years ago. We've taken data from the housing production strategy. My team, which now is just down to me, also did some things in the fall to get information from from citizen groups, and we've been to a couple neighborhood associations, and we've got more that we need to do. The plan itself, if you happen to look at last year's plan, particularly insomnia, smitten with insomnia, has a lot of different components to it. It has a needs analysis, has a market analysis. All those are very prescribed by HUD, and that's the piece that we have to finish up before we launch this for public comment. Another component, which isn't really part of the comp plan, but is nonetheless required, is called the analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. And so that's another piece of it's not part of the plan, but it's another document that we have to read. The consolidated plan also has year one of the 5-year spending plan, which is that year one is the annual action plan. And subsequent, we will do year 2 through 5, and every year annually we have to come and do an annual action plan. And that annual action plan's purpose is to tie the goals in the comp plan to the projects that are being funded, and those will then flow into activities, which is what you all are probably used to seeing. I talk about activities and kind of talking about project level things like we're going to help the YMCA put in a pool lift so that people with disabilities can get in the pool more readily. That would be an activity in HUD speak project for us. So as I just got through kind of outlining, we go from needs down to goals to projects and activities. And the goals and the projects can be very broad buckets, and that's what we will present when it's time. In this consolidated plans, we'll present kind of big buckets, and we'll get to the details of that later. We won't be presenting in this comp plan at the activity level. The impediments to fair housing choice covers a lot of different components. Some of these things that you all have already taken a look at previously in the form of the laws, regulations, policies, and procedures. During our Salem, we went through an extensive process to expand where multifamily housing can occur and reduce the amount of single family housing. The idea is to take a look at this holistically and to create housing choice for everyone. So that spans the whole gamut from folks that are low, moderate income up to middle income. Oftentimes when people talk about or think about affordable housing, they think about, well, we're the single homeless person or houseless person you see in the corner. We need to create a place for that person, and we do. But it's more than that, because there are plenty of families of 3 or 4 or 5 people. They need housing choice as well. So the component of laws, regulations, policies, and procedures is designed to take a look at that, as well as location, availability, accessibility, and then again, just basically to create housing choice. Some examples of impediments that we might run into, and I'm sure that the Planning Commission has never run into this: significant neighborhood resistance to new affordable housing developments. As I said, I've been in local government a long time, certainly experienced it myself in my career, and I'm sure that you all have as well. Could span the things that mundane as lack of transportation options. So if you happen to live in a state that did not allow non-citizens to get a driver's license, then if you built a housing development without transportation options, you're limiting. You're limiting there. So what do we have to work with? Generally speaking, our CDBG grant has come in at about $1.4 million a year. And our home grant is about $0.75 million a year. Those are not the numbers you see in front of you, and there's a reason for that. I'll explain in just a second. We have just gotten this last week notification for our fiscal year 26 grant, and it will remain roughly that. So fiscal year 26, we will get about that same amount. We don't know what fiscal year 27 and beyond will look like, because as most of you know, Congress right now is writing that legislation. So the reason that these numbers are slightly smaller than what you see as the grant is because the grants allow us to take a little bit of the grant money to pay for our own administrative costs. So what I've represented up here is the amount of money that's available to hit our goals with. And then in the middle, you see the general fund at about $110,000, and that represents about how much extra that our administrative costs are compared to what the grant will allow us to pay for.
I have a question here, if I could.
Sure.
So we expect to get about 1.4 million.
Yes.
So if I'm doing the math here, the overhead for managing the grant is $410,000.
We're allowed to take 20%.
Okay.
And 10% on the home side.
And does it cost more than that to administer the grant?
Yes, if you look at what our full-time equivalents are, yes.
And does that work include, in terms of administration, is that like developing the grant application and reporting what we're doing here tonight?
This is certainly a component of it, but typically, or in the past, I should say, we've had 2 full-time equivalents who worked nothing but federal programs, these grants. And so they have to do a lot of things. For instance, they have to create subrecipient agreements for when we do get down to the activity level. They have to create agreements with the awardee. They have to monitor the progress of the project. They have to ensure Davis-Bacon wage compliance. They have to ensure Section 3 labor compliance. They have to, once a project is built, if there's an affordability component in housing, we have a 20-year obligation for home funds to check and make sure that income eligible people are occupying those units. So it's a very extensive list of things that those 2 folks have to do.
Thank you, that's helpful.
And we just lost a position for fiscal year 26, so it's just down to 1 program manager. And some of you may know Ms. Otis, and she's moved on to the state, and so it's not me, but I'm hiring someone to help. The home grant is also used to help an organization called a community housing development organization. And for the city of Salem, we have only one, which is an organization called Get Northwest. They're based in Eugene. To become what's called a CHODO, you have to go through certain qualifications and have a certain representation on your board. And that home grant, there's a section of it set aside by HUD for us to do capacity building for them. So that's another reason why it sort of reduces the amount that we have to work with on projects. I mentioned to you before about the 20-year monitoring. Just to give you an idea, this 0.6 million that we might dole out for somebody to actually build affordable units in a affordable development. A max subsidy on a 1-bedroom unit 2024 was $183,000. So as you can see, if you take that out in chunks of 183, you don't buy many units with that kind of money. So here's a couple of examples for CDBG projects that we've done in the last 5 years. We purchased recycling facility equipment for an organization called Garden that employs adults with developmental disabilities, and they have basically a recycling business, and we spent $170,000 on a new baler and had it installed in their facility so that they could expand their employment. Many of you are familiar with Equina Hall and the rehabilitation that took place. I know that Salem Housing Authority is quite proud of that project and the awards it has won. We put CDBG money into that as well as home. We've also done single-family rehabs with Polk Community Development Corporation over in West Salem, where we granted them money. They found single-family homeowners who qualified income-wise, and they helped help those folks fix their houses. We've done public service projects. They're allowed to spend up to 15% of our CDBG grant on public service projects. And by that, I mean something like Meals on Wheels or hotlines to help domestic violence, that type of thing. Home project examples, again, home investment partnership, you're spending it on housing, essentially. So in this case, Evergreen Apartments over on Cottage Street, the Devon Northwest, our Chodo, we have that church into I think 17 units, and we subsidize 10 of those units. So now that's good news because those 10 units are now for very low income residents. Bad news is that for the next 20 years, someone has to monitor to make sure that Devon Northwest is actually putting those eligible people in there. Now, obviously, I don't have a huge concern about Devon Northwest not doing that because that's what their mission is and that's kind of what they're geared to do. But nonetheless, it's incumbent upon the municipality or the city in this case to verify to HUD that we're actually monitoring that taking place. We're verifying that's happening. And then Sequoia Crossings, I think most of you are familiar with that as well. That was built a couple of years ago by the Salem Housing Authority. And we put in over $2 million of home funds into that, which the bulk of that, the vast majority of that was the home American Rescue Plan funds. You've seen this before in the HDS, which is the map of affordable housing locations, and the ones with the little orange dots all have HUD funding of some sort in them.
So I have a question about this, if I could.
Sure.
Does the city have a policy on where it allocates money for affordable housing? And so, we had a complaint last time, obviously, that, all of our affordable housing dollars are going into a particular neighborhood. You can see a little bit of concentration here, maybe a little less than they would have expected. But do we have a policy that these are dispersed kind of throughout the city?
There is no policy now. I do know that the housing production strategy specifically has one designed to increase the breadth of the city's investment. And it would be good to help our fair housing choice to do so the same, because again, distributing folks is good. I'll be honest with you, as someone who has recently acquired land for a future affordable development, the number one thing is availability. And so that's much more difficult than what one might imagine. Just to find some piece of land that is suitable from a zoning perspective, from a ease of development perspective, and an eventual yield. Has a lot to do with it. When we're talking about spending federal dollars, we have to go through a process called environmental review that is very extensive. It encompasses 14 laws and authorities, some of which are not applicable, but most are. And so it takes quite a while to get through environmental review just to even qualify the thing for federal funding.
Please.
I noticed there's a lot fewer, affordable housing structures in West Salem. Is that because there's no lack of available land out there?
Is there a lack of available land out there? I live in West Salem. I live on 8th Street. Know that area pretty well, and what I can say is that the neighborhood consists of lots and lots of relatively small lots with single family dwellings on them. In fact, that whole area, the flats, as they call it, is almost all of that. With some over on 8th Street, with some apartment buildings and a little bit on Earth as well. And to build something more would require acquiring those lots and concentrating them, or going someplace where multifamily is already contemplated or zoned. And so that's, you're talking about Edgewater and Wallace, essentially.
So do you know how big those lots are roughly? I think part of that flat area is zoned for higher density, or at least R2.
It is, some of it is, yeah, but again, it's more down towards the Edgewater side and Wallace side, not so much in that area between like Elm and 8th from Patterson over to Rosemont.
Okay.
What size lots are you trying, is there a minimum lot size that you look for, or a minimum housing density that you're trying to create?
There's not a minimum, we're trying to spend money wisely. We're trying to get the most bang for our buck. So I'm not a housing developer. So started to
Think like one.
think like one. And I certainly, I try to talk to some, so I understand that you all have heard the housing community, the housing development community come in and talk about expense and how much it costs to build things. Salem Housing Authority is a housing developer. They do this, and when I talk to them, if you're talking about a multifamily building, they don't really want to go anything much below 50 units to make it financially viable in the long term. It's not easy to find a piece of land that you can, even if the density and the zoning allowed it, all of the other components to it would make it difficult to actually build.
So fourplexes and cottage clusters and things like that are just not, you don't get the ROI we want on it.
Not always. I mean, the Market Street property that we just purchased will probably be developing with a cottage cluster because it's single family zone. There's no hard and fast rule. It's strictly, what you can find to get a developer to agree to do. Since we don't do our own developing, we're just, sometimes we acquire land, sometimes the land is acquired and we are contributing money to the development so that it can be produced. So I'm sorry I don't have a.
No, I guess I'm just trying to figure out this problem of, distribution across the city and what are the barriers to distribution across the city. And I was just curious as to how the land size and the building form contributed to that. I'm sure Fox, you have a question.
Not really a question so much as maybe a comment, just anecdotally, having done various projects around Salem. I think sometimes one of the barriers is not actually a barrier so much as a misconception around whether or not housing is right for certain areas. And so you brought up West Salem, and I know in years past, there was a lot of neighborhood resistance around increasing density. And based on that, one developer in particular chose not to pursue it because there was so much resistance just sort of trickling through the grapevine of information. It was not actually a barrier. In fact, it was prime location to have a mixed use project. And I think in the end, it was regretful that that was not the direction pursued. But a lot of this is going to come down to educating not only the public, but just people in general around the importance of having housing in denser areas that have better access to amenities, to services, to transportation, and just feeling more connected within that community. Having affordable housing distributed throughout the city is wonderful, and we should continue to do that. But when we do have opportunities where it can be located in an area that is more appropriate or offers greater opportunity for more people, then I would love to see prioritization of that from the city's perspective, certainly.
There's a mixed message from the planning commission. So,
So
oh, I just mean the dispersion versus concentration, where we're concentrating. So are you finding that, in terms of neighborhood opposition, you know, what I think of in terms of opposition is like kind of the larger scale, big units that seem to kind of be oddities within neighborhoods. So you're talking about those 20, 50 units, you've got single family houses, and also we've got this big unit there. Which is why I was just a little bit curious about like the cottage clusters and like the fourplexes, because they seem to integrate better into neighborhoods. Do you have any sense of like how this question of form is playing out?
I don't really have anything that would be useful to you with that,
Fair enough.
sorry.
Yeah, my question should be simple. Do the counties play into this at all? And you mentioned Polk County specifically, I think earlier. Is there a difference in application to counties?
Marion County is also a participating jurisdiction directly. They get a HUD grant, just like we do, in both CDBG and home, and therefore they have to go through this exact same process for the entire county. We aren't allowed to spend our money outside of the city limits. They're allowed to spend their money anywhere within the county. So if there was a project that would align, where both would participate, and there is in fact one that we just did, Hope Plaza, which is there on Commercial and the street that I ride my bus every day on, but I can't remember off the top of my head. Anyway, the county puts CDBG funds into that as well as we. And so, as well as the city. And so, there are times when we've collaborated, but, you know, the county, of course, is quite large and they do not get, frankly, very much more money than we do. So they've got a much broader scale that they're trying to do. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, so it sounds like Polk doesn't have that same opportunity.
I don't believe Polk is an entitlement community. We worked with Polk Community Development Corporation. It's a nonprofit organization because they had done that kind of project before with single family dwelling, and they were willing to do it in West Salem. So they were kind of a natural partner for us there.
Thank you.
Continue, please.
Okay. Unsurprisingly, when we look at needs analysis, you know, there's lots and lots of communities here in the city that you've all seen before with respect to the housing production strategy. One of the main reasons this looks a lot like what you saw with the housing production strategy is because I think I borrowed this slide from you. But nonetheless, it's not to make light of the situation because, you know, this is the situation. You know, these are the people that our CDBG and home funds are supposed to help. Low, moderate income people. For CDBG, that's 80% or less of AMI. And when you're talking about subsidizing a home unit with an actual unit, you're talking about people that are either 50 or 30%. So those are where these funds are targeted. When we did our own, as I mentioned before, we piggybacked off of our Salem, we piggybacked off the HPS, and we did some of our own outreach at a couple of events. What we found was, again, the size of these kind of represent the level of input that we got back. And the big one there, of course, is housing. And you've heard that before, nothing there. It's a surprise. But what we did get some feedback on is healthcare and childcare. The healthcare component, you see their low barrier access. That kind of speaks more again to the fact that you've got an aging population, and so you've got to find a way to make it accessible to. So let's talk goals real quick. On the left there, I put the 2020 goals, and on the right, the ones that we're going to propose for the 2025 goals. And essentially what we did was we took the first two in 2020 and just kind of made it broader to expand and preserve housing for low moderate income residents. So that seemed to be a more efficient way to describe what we're trying to do rather than segregate it quite like we did before in 2020. And then the other three are going to remain the same. Public service programs, those are the ones that are subject to that cap that I mentioned earlier, where we're allowed to spend 15% of our CDBG on public service activities. Examples again, Meals for Wheels, domestic violence hotline, that kind of thing. Public facilities and infrastructure, that can be a lot of things. I mentioned the YMCA and the pool lift. That was a project that we had a few years ago. It can also mean actual infrastructure that could unlock land for housing development. We got to be a little careful there because we got to make sure that what we spend ties into the actual product, but that's nonetheless something that could be useful. And then finally, promoting economic development. I mentioned the Baylor that was done a couple of years ago. There's a project that we have for this coming year that's a small economic development project sponsored by the community service organization here in the city for micro enterprise. Sir.
You mentioned public facilities and infrastructure and then who looked at the YMCA. The YMCA requires a membership fee, correct?
It does, but if I'm not mistaken, they also have a waiver policy for ineligible folks.
Okay, but that would allow us to be qualified for a public facility.
That could, yes. It could also be other things. You can spend, generally speaking, you can't spend this money on buildings of general government. Like we couldn't contribute to the seismic retrofit of this building, let's say. However, you could use CDBG funds if you wanted to reduce architectural barriers to allow more accessibility for folks.
Would that include like the accessibility improvements at a curb ramp on
Yes.
an adjacent street or something like that?
Yes, you could. Again, you have to be a little careful. I don't want to get too much into the weeds of how this is done, but you've got to make sure you're serving predominantly low, moderate income residents. So let's say if you were going to put a curb ramp into a census tract that was, only 10% low, moderate income people, then you'd run afoul of RIP rules. You'd have to find something that warranted it.
Thank you.
So a little bit about fostering equity, which is also, I mentioned the analysis from Amendments for Fair Housing, but it also just wanted to talk very briefly about this. When we're talking about neighborhoods or resident resistance, and you often hear the term, well, it'll change the character of the neighborhood. And look, I grew up an Indiana farm boy, and so when I go back to visit my parents and I see the orchard that I grew up across, and it's now a housing tract, they say, okay, I understand, boy, the character in the neighborhood really changed. But growth is also inevitable. It's not 1960 anymore when I was growing up, and the US population was what it was. It's much bigger now, we have to have housing. So when you hear things like changing character in the neighborhood, we have to be careful not to make sure that's not code for we're going to keep certain folks out. So when we do an application process for an awardee, they're going to ask us for money to fund an activity or a project. One of some of the things we do is we advertise broadly if we got that opportunity. We have a mandatory pre-application training so that we make sure that everybody understands how to do it. We give ongoing assistance during that application process, and if they're unsuccessful, we are available to debrief. And so this is something that is just kind of part and parcel of what we do in order to try to foster equity in the way we spend. Connecting to the housing production strategy. The things that you see up here, one in the lower right, which is affirmatively furthering fair housing, is a requirement both in the consolidated plan and the HPS. And so, that's obviously an obvious tie, but that's kind of a thing we should be doing. But some of the other components or some of the other strategies that were offered up in the HPS can be supported with these funds, CDBG funds. And so, we can't, $2 million a year, not much support, but nonetheless, it's a big old thing to do. So our next steps, we have to publish this plan, and our intention is to do that on the 2nd of June. And then it will be available for 30 days, or a little over 30 days of public comment. If the planning commission wants to make comment as a body, you're welcome to do so. If you want to make comment as individuals, you're welcome to do so. If the planning commission would like to, once the plan gets released, have another meeting, I'll be happy to come back and we can vote to endorse it. You're not allowed not to vote not to endorse it, but you could vote to endorse it. And then on city council is going to have an adoption hearing on July the 14th.
Thank you. So can you go back to the previous slide with the one more back? Okay, so are those the programs?
These are HPS strategies,
Yeah.
infrastructure funding, housing development in areas of opportunity, et cetera. That these are all HPS activities that we could use CDBG and HUD funds to do.
To support, okay.
To support.
So, you gave us that goals and the buckets.
Yes.
And so where's the program and activities?
Right now, all we've done is develop the goals piece.
Okay,
So we still have to do the,
the programs and activities.
yeah, well, we're not gonna go down, we won't go down the activity
projects.
level, we'll just go to projects.
And the level of a project, so the difference between projects and activities is,
A project might be something along the lines of, we're going to, and this is gonna sound very much like a goal, because sometimes I think HUD makes us try to slice these things up
fair enough,
in a finer fashion than what they really are wanted. But let's say, we've got a goal of expanding affordable housing. So projects might be rehabilitate existing housing, a project might be construct new affordable housing. So you got 2 projects now. And then your activities would flow from each of those projects.
that's helpful, thank you. To what extent do we spend money supporting the rehabilitation of existing housing? I'm especially thinking like lower income, single family housing. I know that could be a real barrier for people.
Yes. Not a lot. I mean, I've been here 4 years and we've done 1 single family project with Polk CDC. And I will have to get back to you about how many actual houses were helped.
Yeah.
It wasn't a lot, I can tell you that. I don't think it was under double digits. What we have done though is we've tried to help with rehabilitation of multifamily.
Sure.
We try to do that quite a bit.
Okay.
And
Is the process for doing the single family assistance similar or the same as like for the commercial? I was the project architect for the YMCA, so I'm very familiar.
Okay.
with the process. I'm just curious if it's,
have you recovered?
what's that?
Have you recovered?
Yes, yes. And, it can be, as I'm sure you are aware, there is a lot of paperwork and recording and detail and I'm just curious if that in itself is a barrier to increasing the single family version because it's just challenging and it takes a lot of time and knowledge, frankly, to be able to go through the process.
It does. You remember that environmental review I was speaking about? Yeah, you have to do an environmental review for every single one of the places that you put in federal funding. So if you, for instance, with Polk CDC, we did what was called a tier 1 review, which kind of covered a lot of the basics. And then every time they would come to us and say, we want to do, at the corner of Elm Main Street, we have to do an environmental review for that exact location.
So would there be, and this is just a general question, and if you don't have an answer, then that's definitely okay. Would there be any value or benefit to trying to identify, you know, maybe there's a particular block or an area that warrants that single family assistance and trying to handle, you know, collection of single family homes so that you can streamline the process of the environmental report and the other reporting requirements.
I mean, I suppose in theory you could, but again, you've got to be helping people to qualify income wise. So I personally wouldn't want to presuppose based upon a visual observation what someone's income level would be. My daughter makes good money and her place looks like she's a hazard. So anyway,
I think I was thinking about it more in the broadly advertising approach. You know, it's going out to a variety of people, so there's an opportunity there for a collective application.
in
By
theory, but it
Maybe it's too complicated.
it would be really complicated. I mean, this is, if you dealt with the YMCA's, then you understand exactly how complicated it became. So, yes,
All right, thank you very much.
thank you.
Do we have anything else in the New York report? No. Okay. And you don't report it, I do. I think you're. I'm ready to hear you.
Ready?
Yeah,
Are you ready here?
are we ready? Question, okay, please.
Do we need to close the public hearing?
Do I need to close the public hearing? Public hearing is closed. All right, thank you. Keep us on the straight and narrow.
Thank you, Michael.
We will take no more testimony, gather noted facts.
Good afternoon. I'm here, Olivia Diaz. I'm the current planning manager. I'm not sure everyone has met me. Question for Lisa. So the only things we have for the planning administrator report is, we don't have a meeting on June 3rd. That's been canceled. The next meeting will be June 17th at a new location. It will be at the Police Department Community Room at 333 Division Street Northeast. That's gonna be our new location after June through the rest of the remodel of Civic. And then our CPD, so Community Planning and Development Department, will be relocating to 440 Church Street, so the old safe building, not the old fancy one, but the old safe building on Church Street. Our public information desk for the PAC will be closed from June 2nd to 13th for in-person services. But we will be available by phone and email and through the portal. Any questions around that? I'm happy to answer any questions. Those for 2 weeks, moving in 2 weeks.
Very
It's
exciting.
gonna be fun.
Any questions for Olivia? Any comments for the good of the order? Yes, ma'am, please.
Just happy 5 months. Ben for noting that last meeting.
I'll drive home already.